Hi, I'm Alyssa. I feel like in an online class you never really get to see people, so this is me. And so, anyways, so for this project I decided to do Candide by Voltaire, and I thought that it was a really interesting book. I've already read it, so I was like, okay, I'll use this for the project, but it's one of those books where it's like, do I really want to read that? And it's like, now it's one of my favorite books, so that was why I chose Candide to do this project with. So, anyways, so what is this book? I feel like it's important to add some historical context here. So Candide was written by Voltaire in 1957. Candide was written during the Enlightenment era. This was a period of intellectual exploration and criticism of religious, political, and social norms of the time. So Candide is considered a satirical novel. It uses humor, irony, and exaggeration to criticize the flaws in society, religion, and philosophy and government of the time. So that was really cool to learn. You know, as an old book, like, what is he writing about? I feel like that's important to the book. So, who is Voltaire? Voltaire was critical of philosophical optimism promoted by Enlightenment thinkers that argued our world is the best possible world that could exist. So Voltaire is just like, guys, is this really the best? So this philosophy suggested that suffering and evil served a purpose in the universe's grand design, and Voltaire was like, does it really? He was skeptical of this idealistic worldview, especially in light of suffering in the world, including war, natural disasters, and religious hypocrisy. I'm pretty sure during this time they were going through the reforms, and they were like, should we really, So with that background, this leads into the story. This is when it was written, that's what it was for. So the story of Candide follows a young man raised in the castle of a nobleman, and he ends up on a big journey across the whole wide world. Candide fell in love with the nobleman's daughter, Cunegonde, and for this he was cast out of the castle, which led to a series of misadventures and a lot of unfortunate events. I mean, this book is just filled with them. Along with his journey, he meets many different characters. So, for the characters, Candide is the protagonist of the story, the main character. He's young and naive, and he's driven by the quest for happiness and the search for his love, Cunegonde. So, his experiences challenge his understanding of the world. The next is Pangloss. Pangloss is seen as Candide's mentor. Pangloss teaches him the philosophy of optimism. He believes that every event, no matter how tragic, is for the best of all possible worlds and the best of all worlds. Pangloss has got his ideas, that's for sure. Next is Cunegonde. Cunegonde is the beautiful woman that Candide falls in love with, and she's like a symbol of unattainable and lost happiness, I guess, because the whole point when Candide is cast out of the castle, basically the whole book, he's just searching for Cunegonde. And then there's also Martin. He was a pessimistic scholar that like contrasted Pangloss's philosophy. He's like the pessimist of the book, I guess. And he travels with Candide and provides like a cynical perspective of life. He's like, no, that's bad. Instead of like, oh, this is for the best. So he's an interesting character. And then Cacambo is Candide's servant. He helps him on this journey, and he does offer some advice, but he's just there with Candide. And then another important character is the old woman. She's like a companion to Candide and Cunegonde. And the old woman is important because she has a tragic backstory, and she serves as a reminder of like life's unpredictability and hardships. So all these different characters make up the satirical novel, and they're like a critical reflection on life and the world. And they use experiences of a young man to expose the flaws of an overly idealistic view of life. So, Candide, you just got this real bad life. Well, I guess not real bad. He ends up figuring it out, but further ado, so for the hero's journey part of this, this will be throughout the story of Candide. I mean, this book has a lot of like components to it, so I tried to like pick what was most relevant to this. So, like, the book is amazing. I love it so much. Okay, so the hero's journey in Candide. So the beginning, the ordinary world is the setting where the hero begins their journey. It represents the normal life before they're called to adventure. So Candide lives in a peaceful, sheltered life. He lives in the castle of Baron Thunderton Trunk in Westphalia. I mean, this is an old book. I tried to look up how to say that, but there's not really many resources that will tell me how to say that in like old British language. I hope that that's right, but basically Candide is raised in luxury and taught by his mentor Pangloss to believe in optimism. So Pangloss is saying, like, the whole point of this book is all is for the best and the best of all possible worlds. So Candide is naive, sheltered from the harsh realities of the world, and he's only ever been taught by Pangloss that this is all for the best anyways. So he enjoys a life of comfort and privilege. So with that, the call to adventure. This is when there's like an event that disrupts the hero's ordinary world and forces them out into the unknown. So Candide's call to adventure is when he is caught kissing Cunegonde in the castle. So Cunegonde is the Baron's daughter, and he ends up catching Candide kissing his daughter, and they're like, "What? You can't be doing that." So he beat him up a little bit, and he threw him out of the castle. So Candide is just thrown out into the outside world. He's got nothing. So from Voltaire, I chose this quote: "Candide, driven out of this terrestrial paradise, rambled a long time without knowing where he went." This is from page 3. So Candide being like exposed from this castle is a literal call to adventure, because now he has to start a journey where he's filled with uncertainty, challenges, and suffering. So this is basically his push from his protected life into a harsh reality. Like, he's only ever lived in a castle with the Baron, and so, you know, he's never just been out on his own. Like, he has no idea what life's like out there, especially being all by himself. So for meeting the mentor, this is an important stage where the hero encounters a wise figure who offers guidance, tools, or wisdom to help them on their journey. I think that Pangloss would be the role of his mentor. Even though Pangloss's wisdom is like what Candide ends up learning is not true. I mean, throughout the whole story, Candide is using this philosophy to like get him through. So I think that this is like his meeting with the mentor moment, because I mean, it is what he believes from the beginning of the story. So Pangloss teaches Candide the optimistic philosophy that all is for the best and the best of all possible worlds. So this guides Candide throughout all of his adventures. And, you know, Pangloss is a flawed mentor. His philosophy becomes more absurd as Candide continues to face more suffering, but he provides Candide with the worldview to cling onto, even as everything around him is becoming more chaotic. So from Candide, I chose this quote: "Now I am convinced that my master Pangloss told me the truth when he said that everything was for the best in the world, for I am infinitely more affected with your extraordinary generosity than with the inhumanity of that gentleman in the black coat and his wife." It was from page 7. So this is from the beginning of the story. Candide is moved by generosity rather than focusing on his horrible experience and cruelty from the black man and his wife. So the black man, this is like when he was just cast out of the castle. He's like alone in this town that he like walked over to, close by to the castle. So the black coat man was a priest, and he believed that what Candide did was wrong, and so he orders him punishment. This also represents like the themes of injustice. Like, you know, Candide really didn't do anything wrong. Like, Cunegonde wanted to kiss him, but this priest is like, "No, you did this wrong," and he ends up being like the one who like helps order Candide to like be put into punishment, because he's like, "No, why would you do that?" So I think that this is like an example of Candide clinging onto Pangloss's philosophy. He's like, "Oh, well, this is for the best, you know, like, whatever." So that was his meeting with the mentor moment. So crossing the first threshold next is when the hero fully steps into the unknown world, and they're leaving their ordinary world. So this is when Candide is kicked out of the castle. He ends up being conscripted into the army after his interaction with the black coat man and his wife. They're like, "Oh, you need to be punished." So Candide gets sent to the army. He finds himself in a brutal war and experiences firsthand the violence and cruelty of soldiers. And like, I don't think he realizes it yet, but his belief in Pangloss's philosophy is challenged when he begins to witness and endure physical and emotional suffering. This represents the full departure from the ordinary world as he steps into the unknown and he faces trials and experiences. So, for my quote, I chose from Candide, I conceive there can be no effect without a cause. Everything is necessarily constantinated and arranged for the best. It was necessary that I should be banished from the presence of Miss Cunegonde, that I should afterwards run the gauntlet, and it is necessary I should beg my bread till I am able to get it. All this could not have been otherwise. That was from page 7. So after he gets kicked out and he's like forced into the army, he's like reflecting on these hardships and what he's been through in like the little bit of time that he's just been kicked out of the castle. But he believes that these events are unchangeable and it leads to his predestined perfect plan of life. He's like, okay, I got kicked out, but like this is for the better. Like something's good is gonna come of this. Like I just need to suffer a little bit and it's all gonna be better. So he's just like going with the flow here. So that was when he was first crossing that threshold. So for the trials and victories, to start with the road of trials, I mean, this whole book is like a road of trials. Candide, he goes through a lot. Like I had to pick out what is relevant to this, but like this whole book is just a road of trials until the end. So the road of trials refers to the series of challenges or tests that the hero faces in order to grow and transform. So all these trials he's going through are like challenging his worldview and forces him to like reflect and reconsider. So yeah, those are a few examples that I thought were most important from the book. Is when Candide is first conscripted into the army and he ends up witnessing the death of his dear friends and was caught in natural disasters. I mean, there's also just like the other misfortunes along the way, but I thought that those were the most notable ones. So for the first one, when Candide is conscripted into the army, he like faces traumatic experiences. This is when he's first kicked out of the castle, you know. Like, he's just out in the world and he's like, oh, what is this? So for my quote, I chose this one from Candide. As they were preparing to make him set out the gauntlet for the third time, our hero, unable to support it any longer, begged as a favor that they would be so obliging as to shoot him through the head. The favor being granted, a bandage was tied over his eyes, and he was made to kneel down. So that's from page 9. The irony of the situation is that Candide still believes that this is the most reasonable solution, and that his suffering was for the better. And if he was meant to be shot in the head and dead right then and there, then that's what he was meant to do. This is also Voltaire using satire to show how misguided it is to believe everything is best, when it's clear that the world is full of unjust suffering. I mean, Candide just got like sent to the army for kissing Cunegonde, basically, and now he's like forced to run the gauntlet and suffering this enduring and pain and beatings from these soldiers. It's like, what? So, another one that I thought was a big challenge to Candide was when Candide and Pangloss were on a boat in the ocean, and James is another character, the Anabaptist. James ended up being thrown overboard by another person on the boat. And I mean, this story is just, it has so many little crazy events. It's a really good book. But James is thrown overboard by some other little side character in the book. And for the quote, I chose from Candide, the philosopher Pangloss, who demonstrated to him that the roadstead of Lepsin had been made on purpose for the Anabaptists to be drowned there. So this was from page 13, so it's like earlier in the book too. Candide and Pangloss set out on a boat. They joined with the Anabaptists. And when James was thrown overboard, Candide was like, oh no, like my dearest James. He's about to like jump overboard and like go save James, try to help save him, but Pangloss prevented him, stopped him, and they let him drown because Pangloss believed it was the way his life was meant to be. I mean, he said like this river was made for him to be drowned here. And I think the irony in this is that like Candide was going to save him, but Pangloss was like, no, this was made for the best. Like, he was meant to drown. I mean, like, Candide's gonna be like, was he really meant to drown? So, the next incident was when, this was like right after James was just thrown overboard the boat. Candide and Pangloss are also caught in an earthquake. So, like, their boat lands, and, like, everyone on the boat died. There were only, like, I think there was only 4 survivors. It was Candide, Pangloss, the man who killed James, and then the sailor, like, the one that was running the boat. And Candide's like, really? Out of all the people that's gonna live, it's gonna be you, the one that, like, killed my friend? But anyway, so back to this. They were the only few survivors, so they landed, and then followed shortly, there was an earthquake. They, like, just got off this boat, their friend just died, they land, and then there's an earthquake. And then followed by this is the Inquisition's public executions. So, like, they just land, and it's just, like, event after event. So for this quote from Candide, I chose, the 2 men who would not eat bacon were burned, and Pangloss was hanged, which is not a common custom at these solemnities. The same day, there was another earthquake, which made most dreadful havoc. So he just lands, and Pangloss, along with, like, some other people, like, they take them captive, and Pangloss is hanged, and he's pretty much hanged for nothing. And Candide is like, what? Why are they hanging you? So Candide tries to make sense of this with Pangloss's philosophy, but ultimately, I think that, like, this devastation challenges his understanding of optimism. I mean, earthquake after earthquake, Pangloss is hanged. It also shows hypocrisy, because Pangloss was hung for no reason, and then the 2 men that were burned for not eating bacon, that was like a religious thing, that was probably their religious belief, and they were burned for that. I think that it also shows, like, his criticism of, like, religious unjust of the time, so that was just in there. But I mean, all of these together, Candide really is, like, he's just going through all this stuff, and I think that this, like, these first 3 events is when Candide is like, what? Like, how is this for the best? So for this quote, I chose from Candide. Candide, amazed, terrified, confounded, astonished, all bloody and trembling from head to foot, said to himself, if this is the best of all possible worlds, what are the others? O my dear Pangloss, my beloved master, thou greatest of philosophers, that ever I should live to see thee hanged, without knowing for what. O my dear Anabaptist, thou best of men, that it should be thy fate to be drowned in the very harbor. So these instances are where Candide really begins to question his ideals and beliefs that everything really is for the best. I mean, he literally says there, like, oh, why should I have to see Pangloss hanged without ever knowing the reason? And, he's, like, reminiscing on James being thrown overboard. Like, why did he drown? Like, he could have saved him. He's like, why did he drown? So I think this is where he begins to be like, how is this for the best? So for the meeting the goddess, I think that this moment can be represented. Well, meeting with the goddess represents a moment when the hero encounters an idealized figure that symbols transformation. So in Candide, I think that this would be like when he meets the old woman. So after Candide was left alone after Pangloss was hanged, and the old woman found him and took her to her home and took care of him. She didn't really say anything. She just kind of, like, took him and was like, follow me, and then started taking care of him. And she ends up reuniting Candide with Candide, who he thought was dead up to this point. So I mean, this is really just where stuff starts to get crazy. But the old woman offers important advice, guidance, and she's a nurturer and protector for Candide. She just, like, took him in, was like, oh, I'm just gonna take care of you. So the old woman was also very wise. She tells, throughout different chapters, like, this is a long story, but the old woman basically tells Candide how she was a princess when she was younger, but she explains that she became a slave and she just suffered this horrible life, and that's how she ended up just being a maid. So the old woman gives Candide realistic advice, and she ends up, like, giving him ways to cope with the harsh realities of life. She was a princess, she ended up a slave, and now she's just a maiden, and she's like, well, I'm just gonna live my life and make it the best that I can be, instead of, like, waiting for something greater to happen, as if this was what she was meant to be. But she, like, made her life herself. So with her wisdom, she challenges Candide's optimism, and I feel like she helps him mature as she, like, tells her story. With this is also the atonement with the father. Atonement with the father usually involves confronting or reconciling with an authority figure who represents order, morality, and wisdom. So the father figure in Candide can be considered Pangloss. By the end of the story, Candide realizes that Pangloss' philosophy that everything happens for the best does not hold up in suffering and hardships, and he acknowledges that his teachings, his whole life, are unrealistic. So, I mean, he also ends up reconnecting with Pangloss. He's like, Pangloss, I thought you were hanged. Like, how did you just come back to life? And towards the end of the story, Pangloss ends up living the, like, more subtle life with Candide, but for just this part, this marks the atonement with the father, and it shows like these flawed ideals he previously had, and the father figure is the philosophy and moral teachings that Pangloss, his mentor, provided for him. He's like Pangloss, like, you said all of that, but like then you were hung. Like, what are you doing here? Okay, so for the hero's return towards the end of the part of the story, the hero's journey and their return is the phase in the monomyth where the hero comes back to the ordinary world after undergoing transformation. The return symbolizes a return to the ordinary, but the hero's forever changed. So in Candide, he goes from like being naive and this idealistic person, and now he like understands the importance of practical living and self-sufficiency. So for the first part of this, I chose crossing the return threshold. So throughout his journeys, Candide also finds the city of El Dorado. It's like the city filled with gold and prosperity. Like everyone's fed, everyone is cared for, they're wealthy, they're rich, everyone's happy. So he goes there and he like meets with the king of this town, and the king's like, if you stay here, you're gonna stay here forever, live this happy life, but if you leave, you can never come back. So Candide ended up deciding to leave El Dorado, and El Dorado represented like a utopia. Like this is his perfect city, and Candide decides to leave and return to the normal world. So I think this signifies the crossing the return threshold, and it also marks Candide's realization that material wealth or like a rich city cannot guarantee happiness or just like magically make the best of all worlds. He like ends up leaving because Cunegonde isn't there. He's like, oh well, my dearest Cunegonde isn't here, so what is this worth? So this philosophical return back to Europe allowed Candide to understand that he must face life challenges and be responsible without relying on wealth or utopia. He could have had this whole life made out for him, but he's like, no, I'm gonna go, like, because Cunegonde's not here. Also, like, he could have had that perfect life, but he was like, I want what's best for me. Like, I need to make my own decisions. So I think this is where Candide also first starts, like, making decisions for himself, like, what he wants to be happy, rather than just being like, oh, well, this is meant to be. So, I mean, he could have had this perfect life, and he turned that down. So I think that that's, like, a notable. Sorry, I was interrupted. I had to pause and come back. So where was I? The Master of Two Worlds. So this stage occurs when the hero reconciles between the ordinary and the extraordinary world. So the hero must find a way to live by both and balance their inner transformation to the world that they live in. So after leaving El Dorado, Candide returns to Europe. He comes back to the harsh realities of war, politics, and social inequality. So Candide now has the wisdom to see that his philosophical ideas that he once blindly accepted are like absurd. He comes back and he's like, he had this perfect life that he could have had in the city. He came to El Dorado. It was like this perfect city filled with riches and gold, and the king of the city told him, like, you can either stay here forever, but if you leave, like, you can't ever come back here. So Candide, I think it's an important moment that, like, when he leaves, he decides, like, for himself, that's what he wants. So he sees that this philosophy is absurd, and he begins to combine his practical life lessons from his journey, like, into his life after he returns from El Dorado. So Candide's mastery of both worlds is shown in his ability to adapt his mindset to the internal growth that he achieved. He leaves, and ultimately, at the end of the story, he just decides that he wants to live his own life. So, to the freedom to live. The freedom to live represents the hero living a free life that incorporates their new wisdom and experiences from their journey. So I think Candide's final decision, he ends up on the farm with a few of his friends, and they just end up gardening and living together like a simple life. So after all of Candide's challenges and suffering, him and his friends settle on a farm, and Candide, this is like the last quote, you know, it's like an important quote. So this is from page 97. Candide says, "Let us cultivate our garden." It's from Voltaire, page 97. So this marks the freedom to live because Candide disconnects from his previous beliefs, that he embraces practical work and living a fulfilling life that's like meant for him. I mean, he lives with Cunegonde and Pangloss, but they're just living on this farm, and he's like, "Let us cultivate our garden." I think it's important that he also says "let us" instead of like "we now" or like "we want to." Like, "We will now cultivate our garden." He says "let us." You know, I think it's important. I think he realizes that like all the pain and the suffering in the world that he used to believe is for the better, he's now like, that's not for the better, and he's like, I don't want to suffer any longer. So he's like, "Let us cultivate our garden," you know, let me do my thing. So I think this is where Candide, you know, he finds his life, and after all of his journeys, he's like, "Oh well, I'm just gonna live my own life," you know, that was absurd. So Candide no longer focuses on the perfection, and he finds contentment in living a simple life, cultivating his garden. And he accepts the imperfections of life. He focuses on meaningful, tangible actions rather than the pursuit of unattainable ideas that he's gonna live like some perfect life, and that he has to suffer because he doesn't. You know, he can make choices for himself and do what he needs to do. So for the conclusion, in the end, Candide represents a character who learned the importance of self-sufficiency and, you know, personal effort. You know, he's like, I don't have to suffer, I can just do things the way that I want to. So the wisdom he gained throughout his journey shows that happiness doesn't come from the promises of some philosophy that's all is for the better and this is the best possible world, but from everyday practical interactions with meaning. You know, like, you have to make your own world the way that you want it to be. So Candide found his place in a flawed and unpredictable world that's full of suffering, and he learns to cope and work for himself instead of saying that his suffering was just for the better. So, I mean, he had a really big transformation here. He just ends up living his own life. So I think that that's important, and this is one of my favorite books, and I think that has a really good story with a lot of good elements, and also it is satirical, so that adds to it. So that's how Candide in the book, this fiction, like, goes through and uses kind of the hero's journey. This is my works cited page, the picture of Voltaire that I had. It was from Encyclopedia Britannica, and then I just had like an online version that had been published of Voltaire, because this is like an old book. So that's all. Thank you.